Hey there, Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, friend of the channel, Chris Cappy, has launched his new independent channel after going solo from Task and Purpose. And boy, it grew fast. It is already over 400,000 subscribers, and they're only a couple videos in. And for my first look at his new channel, I wanted to check out this video because the topic is something I'd be very interested in learning more about and adding anything that I've learned. And it's called US Black Ops in Europe is Legitimately Insane. So with this, I'm interested to know if it's specifically like Black Ops. Are we actually talking about American military boots on the ground getting involved in certain things? Or does this also include maybe like CIA coups and that sort of thing? Either way, I know he's going to have some great stories to tell. All right, the original video is linked down below. Again, he just created this channel, Cappy Army, and make sure you are subscribed to it. All right, let's see what we got. All right, these type of activities, again, are fun to look at because they're often not something you're going to get taught in an American history class, but they're so fascinating, and it's so important because it explains so much about kind of the world that we live in, foreign policies, the relationship between the United States and other countries, because U.S. has been so impactful, especially from the Cold War years and onward. So let's look at some of these instances here. See what we got.
There have
also don't know what his new
reports of
style is going to
American
be, if
Black
it's
Ops
different
in
at all.
Europe, but the full extent of these shadow missions are only now becoming
Okay,
clear.
so actual military
Because recently,
operations.
some of them have been declassified or widely leaked to the media. From the depths of the Cold War.
By the way, that is where a lot more information has been coming out, right? Your parents, your grandparents, the stuff that they learned about, or they, lived through these eras, likely don't know a lot about this because there's been a lot of things declassified. And with the internet, more information being spread, but then also from these other countries getting their input has really opened this stuff up.
To the modern conflict in Ukraine. I dug through these congressional testimonies and newly
went out to the front lines,
CIA
did reporting,
so you don't have to end up on a watch list. In this iceberg format video, we're going to start with the crazy missions and then
get
get
back the new Johnny Harris,
wild, insane ones. The way American special operations work is each of the 7 groups have their own region that they specialize.
We're talking boots on the ground, huh?
Has specialized in the defense of Europe since they were created.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I have not heard of these groups before. Okay, so there's a group that's kind of in Europe proper. You've got the Middle East. You've got an East Asian, I guess kind of a Pacific one, an African one, and a Latin American one. Okay. All right.
In 1952.
Never heard of these.
Their original mission was to conduct partisan warfare deep behind enemy lines if the Soviet Union ever invaded into Western Europe. Because of this unique mission set, they're unlike any other special forces unit. They were given fake identities and cover stories to hide their true background, the kind of tradecraft you'd normally see in a CIA officer.
I was going to say, espionage history in the Cold War is so fascinating to learn about. Again, because so much of it was hidden, and you get to learn about like how good the KGB actually was. We hear about the CIA, but what actually went down with these. It's super fascinating. Endless, potential for movies and stuff.
They were required to learn Russian, get really into European culture, and start smoking cigs. By 2021, U.S. Special Forces were present in 33 out of 44 European countries.
Just there, ready to go.
A full 11% of the Special Forces were deployed to Europe.
Wow. So I don't know, this many like boots on the ground. And if you're talking about, I forgot, did he say in a specific time period here? Because you'll notice they're not all like NATO nations. There's a lot of other nations. And depending on when this was, I can guarantee they were not in the actual military alliance of the U.S., NATO.
Many of them 10th.
Guess that's why they're Black Ops.
General Clark, the former chief of U.S. Special Operations Command, said our SOF have partnered with European allies since before 2014. Focused on building resistance networks. But that is not just in the Baltics, that's through the rest of Europe. When General Clark was saying the rest of Europe, I think he was possibly hinting at a place called Ukraine. Probably. Where we're only just now starting to learn the true extent of American clandestine missions. In 2014, Russia...
the relationship haven't been so, I guess, complicated from the way of when in the early to mid 90s, Ukraine... after they get their independence and their sovereignty after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and you agree to borders and all that stuff. Part of that was also getting up their nuclear weapons, Budapest Protocol, is that what that's called, with kind of guarantees that the U.S. would support there. So it makes sense. Ever since the early 90s, the United States would have quite a presence there, especially in the Black Ops era, because that is not something Russia also wanted to see, was Ukraine not joining NATO. But you better believe that if there's in these policies, the U.S. would support Ukraine in some essence, but not have Ukraine in NATO, then there's going to be some Black Ops operations. It's probably going on way before 2014, right? All right, so 2014, yeah, annexation of Crimea.
Annexed Crimea and started arming separatist movements inside Ukraine. A lot of people
don't know this, pro-Russian region.
But in response, the 10th Group U.S. Special Forces sent a 150-man-sized company on the ground inside Ukraine. And they weren't just there to party in Eastern Europe and drink the forbidden absinthe.
They actually had a referendum there by people of Ukraine that, from what I understand, by all accounts, was very legitimate in the way I think the voting went down. If you're like, was there voter fraud and all that, of agreeing to be annexed, I guess, by Russia. So there are more pro-Russian parts. Maybe you've heard about this in the conflict. More pro-Russian parts of Ukraine, the eastern coast there, or eastern side, I should say, and then Crimea for sure.
Oh, we'll see they had a big tactical impact. When I was researching this episode, trying to find information on US Black Ops missions in Europe, I noticed something annoying. The search engine prioritized paid results to the point where I had to skip to freaking page 3 to find anything genuinely useful. That's the initial reason why I reached out to FreeSpoke to sponsor this episode, and they agreed. FreeSpoke prioritizes relevant information. They also provide unbiased search results, giving me a rating of each publication,
like another
whether it's
ground
left,
news
right, or
kind of
center. They're not prioritizing some hidden agenda. Look, I'm always typing into the internet looking up stuff on bombs, CIA kill teams. That 100% has put me on some type of government watch list. But not anymore, because unlike big tech, FreeSpoke respects your privacy, so your browsing history is private and you're not getting bombarded with targeted ads. It even gives me the power to... Wait,
is it just political stuff, or are people going to be using this for other things?
Independent media sources like podcasts
that you want to stay off watch list for.
25% off your annual subscription by using my promo code CAPPY25, which gets you 25% off your annual subscription. The link is in the description under the video. That's CAPPY25 to get 25% off. Start using a search engine that helps promote independent media, voices like my own, and will save you an enormous amount of time on research and work. In February 2022, U.S. Special Forces 10th Group was actually on the ground in Ukraine, in the capital city of Kyiv. They were training their Ukrainian counterparts in how to use sensitive items like Javelin and Stinger missiles to defend themselves. They actually helped train them on new reconnaissance and attack drone tactics.
Man, look at all this tech.
And according to SOCOM themselves, they helped train ultimately 27,000 Ukrainian soldiers. These SF guys were probably thinking to themselves, like most training events, that a Russian attack was never going to really happen and they were wasting their time. But for the first time ever, the meme "nothing ever happens" was wrong, because that's when U.S. Colonel Lucas Van Antwerp...
Wait, what is this scene? He's in front of a Trojan horse? What is going on here? Did we just go back in time?
Nothing ever happens was wrong, because that's when U.S. Colonel Lucas Van Antwerp got word from his higher-ups that there was solid intelligence Russia was going to actually invade. We had heard about the mobilization that was going on, like 100,000 troops or whatever, and sometimes, again, countries historically have just used that to posture. So it was so debated, but I remember within the week of the actual invasion coming out, Biden administration, and officials saying like, yeah, it looks imminent. And then, it was debated from there. People were like, no, he wouldn't actually do that. That would be insane. Western Europe, the United States would intervene and directly intervene, and you get nuclear warfare and all that stuff. But we know that didn't go down like that. Ordered to get American troops and officials out of the country fast to avoid direct contact with incoming Russian soldiers, because that could lead to World War III. Right. Colonel von Antwerp was tasked with quickly racing to evacuate, close the American embassy in the capital. They destroyed sensitive materials and blew up communication devices. They blew up computer servers to prevent them from falling into Russian troops' hands if Kyiv were to fall. It was a full-on smash run. This is exactly the kind of politically sensitive diplomatic mission that the 10th Group was trained for. 2 months later, another Western Special Operations mission took place on Ukrainian soil, the details of which were only just recently revealed last month. In April 2022, a convoy of unmarked military vehicles drove through the tight city streets of Kyiv. The convoy picked up 2 Ukrainian men who were in plain clothes, and they looked unassuming, but behind that, they were two of Ukraine's highest-ranking top military generals.
Right through the city, so it's just like, nothing to see here. We got these armored American vehicles and they're just yanking officials.
Heavily armed British special forces wearing regular non-uniform clothing provided security for this convoy in Kyiv. That means that SAS commandos were only a few clicks away from where Russian positions were at the time. They drove 400 miles west to Poland across the border. Once there, these two Ukrainian generals jumped on a cargo plane and flew to U.S. Army European Command in Germany. When they arrived, they met American CIA officers. They worked closely together to plan a campaign against Russian forces. The details and extent of this cooperation were not fully known until now, because this mission was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the entire war in Ukraine. The top American general in charge of this black op was a man named General Donahue. Donahue was already a legend in the clandestine world. He fought alongside CIA hit teams in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. This guy's the real-life Jack Ryan, or Reacher, whichever you're more into sexually. His job was to create a team codenamed...
I watched the Jack Reacher one. Oh, no, Jack Ryan. That's the John Krasinski ones, right? Those were pretty cool.
Task Force Dragon. For the next 3 years, this Task Force Dragon, their assignment was to guide Ukrainian missiles and artillery onto Russian targets. If that doesn't shock you, it should. Because officially and publicly, American intelligence aid was limited to not providing any information that could quote-unquote reasonably lead to lethal consequences.
Well, I think we all know this has been the case for so long. You have the like public deals that you and like alliances and agreements that you make, and then there's always the other layer that has not gone away. Such a Cold War influence there.
U.S. intelligence called the Russian locations points of interest instead of calling them targets, so as to be less provocative. That's maybe the most classic Pentagon speak I've ever heard in my life. Yeah, it's so political. Sir, look at this fascinating point of interest that I found, where an entire Russian platoon is assembling in the open in that tree line over there.
I mean, they can be targets, but a point of interest can also be other things. Like for me, it might be that's where the ice cream is.
Would be a real shame if something happened to them, sir. The United States military's goal was to help Ukraine defend itself because they wanted to offset that major numerical advantage held by Russian troops. And there were numerous examples revealed by U.S. officials just recently that spoke to the Times that American satellite networks identified Russian officers' location, their hideout, and then Ukraine sent a missile blowing that target up. Sorry, I meant point of interest, blowing that point of interest up. American commanders in Europe provided coordinates that were sent on a secure computer network that even displayed what priority the points of interest were. It was like a government-sanctioned hit list. General Donahue would reportedly say to his Ukrainian counterparts,
"You get surprised by any of this right now?
I mean, just trust when you shoot, it will hit.
I'm not.
And you'll like the results. And if you don't like the results, tell us. We'll make it better." End quote. That's the kind of white glove service I would kill for, and they were killing for. The U.S. intelligence was even on a small unit level, where General Donahue would reportedly tell Ukrainian infantry units which houses they were empty in front of them that they were cleared to go up in advance to. It was basically...
I wonder how, like accuracy rate of a lot of these things, though, right? You know, there's definitely such thing as bad intelligence, and the U.S. has been victims of a lot of bad intelligence before. Happens all the time. Now, a lot of that again is not going to be publicized because why would you? It's very political. War is political by nature. So, like those houses, for example, like how solid is that information? Because it's changing, and you never know.
The first war done remotely through Zoom. This would be the perfect place for a VPN advertisement. Don't want the Kremlin knowing you're sending targeting data to Ukraine? Use code CAPPY for 10% off your military-grade VPN. But on the real, how were they getting such spicy intel? It's likely has something to do with the presence of Western special forces that were...
You're definitely not hiding yourself if they actually wore those flags. Nothing to see here. And all my tactical gear.
On the ground in Ukraine. This is now nothing to do with the presence of Western special forces that were on the ground in Ukraine.
You're going to have plenty of collaborators.
This is now undisputed common knowledge because of an April 2023 leak which showed that 14 U.S. special forces were in Ukraine, which is about the size of one A-team detachment. This was part of a wider intelligence leak done by a U.S. Air National Guard soldier in a Discord channel. Look, if there's any Chinese or Russian Air National Guard troops that want to leak intelligence to me, feel free to do it on our Discord server. But that airman was later sentenced to 15.
Imagine that. The Cappy Army Discord is actually just the hub for world military intelligence.
Years for leaking those documents. What the documents didn't confirm
the new
was the location of where those Green Berets were in Ukraine, although officials later claimed it was at the embassy in Kyiv. However, just in March 2025, the Times revealed that for the past 3 years, the U.S. government authorized numerous clandestine operations, including dispatching American military advisors with authorization to travel close to the front lines.
I think one thing that's interesting to always be thinking about is, for every one of these groups that exist, how many of the opposition are there going to be? Obviously, in Ukraine, there's going to be a ton of Russian information and probably these kind of black ops groups, especially because you had so many people in Ukraine that were supportive of Russia and maybe working with them or something. So, and then also is coming to my mind about, you know, you had these black ops groups. Would someone like Russia know that those exist? How well are those hidden? What do you think about that?
Which probably shouldn't surprise us because Chinese military advisors are reportedly also going near the front line too. It's a big learning experience for everyone. It's a nice old field trip. Everyone's gooning right now in this proxy war.
He said right the word.
On the absolute edge. We know Russian FSB has been operating deep in Western Europe on sabotage missions. It doesn't really surprise me that both sides, which are nuclear powers, are using this kind of alternative third option that's easy for them for plausible deniability and to deny it even happened.
I mean, it's just the history of proxy wars. It's a legacy of the Cold War. The idea has never gone away. In fact, it's probably just increased the idea of proxy wars even more so now.
The Russians intercepted and publicly released communications in 2024 between high-level German government and military officials. In those recordings, they were talking about British special forces on the ground in Ukraine helping to operate Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Everyone lost their shit when they heard about this. The UK Prime Minister at the time confirmed part of this story when he said that a small number of British Army personnel supporting the armed forces of Ukraine were there, but that they didn't have any plans for a large-scale deployment.
You know what else we have found historically that's probably frightening to think about is how many of these type of operations go on without presidents even knowing. And there can be different reasons for that. Like that was huge in the CIA. They basically operated the Dulles brothers and stuff, even though they were in like the Secretary of State and head of CIA and stuff, but would basically operate independently. And maybe just for the fact of we go through so many presidents, right? So you have these plans that are in place and they're long-term plans and they don't want them to be changed by different presidents kind of going through that sort of thing. I mean, it said that Harry Truman did not even know about the Manhattan Project until he became president. Like some of these incredible amount of information, people not knowing.
End quote. He didn't go as far as to say that they were helping with missile strikes. The American intelligence leak showed that 50 British commandos were on the ground in Ukraine, enough for a Storm Shadow party. When I was in Kyiv, I heard rumors of British and French special forces.
Those are great videos, by the way.
Operating close to the front early in the war during the invasion. My fixer, my guide, told me a story of how he saw French soldiers advising defensive positions when the Russians were closing in on Kyiv. At the time, I thought it was just rumor, hearsay, he said, she said. But these new reports verify some of these details. I think that's part of the fascinating thing about clandestine missions in Europe and on this continent. Because unlike in the Middle East, the Pacific, or Africa, US soldiers who are stationed somewhere in Europe live a relatively familiar life in a city that probably isn't that different from the city they grew up in back home, except there's a lot more 80s music playing in the cafes. But other than that, it's not
nothing wrong with that.
The next US Black Op CIA officers recently disclosed a network of 12 bases.
This video all Ukraine stuff
and funded in Ukraine. And I'm not going to bury the lead here, guys. This is absolutely as insane as it sounds, and I was blown away when I read about it. These bases were equipped by the CIA and created close to the front lines.
Yeah.
This way, they could intercept Russian communications and monitor the spy satellites passing overhead.
And that's a dangerous territory because those are the more pro-Russian areas as well, where, like I was saying earlier, you'd think Russia would also have a lot of intelligence in.
The story from earlier, you remember about the targeting team in Europe, the Dragon targeting team? I think a lot of their information came from this network that we're going to talk about. They would send coordinates for missile strikes and track Russian troop movements from here. These were located deep in the forest in the region of Donetsk, and their entrances were hidden underground. In them, a whole team of Ukrainian intelligence soldiers worked away, and they first were stood up in 2014 by the CIA right after Russia annexed Crimea. They were designed to prevent future actions like that from taking place, or at least to mitigate them.
So I'm getting the idea that, yeah, after the annexation of Crimea, there was a big influx of black ops and black ops ready, I guess, type of personnel, because they thought that this would continue to happen, that it wouldn't just stop at Crimea, which was true. It took about another decade almost.
I know a lot of it sounds like tinfoil hat conspiracy plots, but it comes straight from the lips of the CIA officers themselves. I don't know why I said
well, there's
lips.
precedent for all this.
Like I'm thinking about kissing the CIA. I'm not.
There's
this
historical
is information
context
that they passed on publicly to the New York Times, which tells us that they likely wanted the Russians to know this information because they don't care if I know it. These outposts near the Russian border were used as staging areas for infiltration missions inside Russia by Ukraine.
And you did see some of those. There were some attacks there. You know, I don't think Ukraine, again, was ever going to think that they could take over serious territory in Russia, but those type of incursions are important for negotiation deals where you can be from some kind of position of strength, but they've still not come to a deal, even after these.
You remember how the embassy was evacuated by U.S. Special Forces? Yeah, at that same time, the CIA officers were the only Americans authorized to stay on post at these remote bases while the Russian invasion took place. According to Ivan Bakanov, former head of the SBU, he said, quote, "Without them, there would have been no way for us to resist the Russians or beat them," end quote. Starting in 2016, the CIA...
U.S. intelligence probably being one of the things that you can offer the most of. Now, there was a lot of military aid given. Stuff, you know, I've been told that was kind of sitting around in U.S. armories and things like that. Not as much like just straight up cash or something, but just reallocating unused stuff.
Train an elite team of Ukrainian commandos called Unit
Maybe that's changed now, though.
2245. The U.S. government gave strict orders to not kill any Russians with their training. So, of course, the Ukrainians immediately started killing Russians with their training. They blew up Arsen Pavlov. He was a soldier in the occupied Donetsk region, an officer, and they killed him with a bomb. They used a remote-controlled unmanned shoulder-fired rocket launcher to kill a Russian-backed commander in another occupied territory.
By the way, this is where it's really easy to like fabricate certain things. Like, you know how they were saying, okay, the Americans, you got to tell them you can't do the direct shooting, right? I guess you can just be sitting there and pointing targets out and stuff like that. But either side could probably do something like that. Be like, nope, they all shot at us. Therefore, we have justification to go to war even completely. You got to be very careful and roll when you're rolling those dice there.
We saw several assassinations inside Moscow, for instance. And when the CIA heard about this, they bugged out because they were worried it would mean retaliation from Russia. This led to the Ukrainian leader of the unit being fired. And the Russians
I hadn't heard of those assassinations.
With a car bomb that killed the 2245's commander, Colonel Shaplov. Killed him on his way to see and meet with his CIA
That's so Cold War.
If I put on my regular infantryman thinking cap, here's how I'd break down the geopolitical situation that special forces are facing in Europe. After World War II, the U.S. pumped Europe full of cash and security guarantees to rebuild it into a wall of friendly democracies.
Marshall Plan. So what they saw from World War I historically was that these war-torn areas that have their economies destroyed, those places are grounds for revolutionary movements. And with communism, right, being the feared type of revolution by Western states, they thought that building up these economies quickly would prevent them. I mean, Germany, you know, was kind of almost on the verge of becoming communist before or with the towards the end of World War I. Look into the German Revolution that went down and almost succeeded there. So they did the same thing, pumping money and rebuilding efforts into Japan because prevent communism that way.
In the Cold War, they kept their defense budgets up, but once the Soviet Union threat faded, a lot of them hit the brakes on spending. The main fear has always been the same, getting steamrolled from the East and handed a government that they didn't vote for. That's why so many countries sprinted to join NATO in the 1990s. Right. Nobody wanted to end up back under Moscow's boot, but from the Russians' point of view, NATO creeping around closer and closer looked like a threat from their perspective. So they claim they're just pushing back. And now,
so this has been good because he's giving the context that's developed the ideas for both Western Europe and with Russia, which is, again, right, these light purple, so many of them, not all of them here, but were under Soviet occupation or puppet states or whatever, and then get their independence, right, in the early 90s when the Soviet Union collapses, but were fearful of some kind of, like another unification effort. Maybe Russia tries to go and do this again, because, again, there's been precedent for this. But the thing that, of course, Russia didn't like was, they didn't go and take those regions, but those places did join NATO, which was seen as a provocation. You hear Putin, he's talked about a lot about how that this is a provocation. It's like the Soviet Union, like the Cold War is over. Why is there still something like NATO? NATO was created to be a deterrent for war against the Soviet Union. So if the Soviet Union falls, why does NATO exist? So then that's been used as justification for Russia, even again, post-Soviet Union collapse Russia, of trying to be military, I guess, be militarily prepared, and then be very vocal when these places join NATO. Now, Ukraine never does, because that was going to kind of be part of their agreements that they would get some support, but it did leave them hung out to dry big time, as you can see right now. Or these other ones in purple now, the light purple will likely never be invaded just because they are NATO states, and the NATO clause says that if one of those places gets invaded, that is seen as a provocation of war and everyone will retaliate. I mean, I guess the one caveat that could happen is, what if the United States was to say leave NATO, which is not completely out of the realm of possibility, because it's been kind of hinted at in like the Trump administration, but you still have all of Western Europe to deal with too. So I don't know. What do you guys think would happen to NATO if the United States didn't join? What do you think can be some effects of that? I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
Closer and closer looked like a threat from their perspective. So they claim they're just pushing back. And now here we are again on the edge, watching tanks and borders like it's 1985 all over again. So for the next story, let's go back to where it all started in the Cold War, when the US and Soviet Union were waging a secret undercover war against one another around the world. This is a story of Operation Valuable, which was the CIA's first ever paramilitary operation that I know of in 1949, just 2 years after their creation. It took place in the small nation of Albania in southern Europe, which had suffered greatly under Nazi occupation in World War II and was now governed by a Soviet-backed Enver Hoxha, together with the British MI6,
that dude was wild if you haven't heard of him,
intelligence services. The CIA planned to gather hundreds of Albanians that had been scattered across Europe during World War II, train them in guerrilla warfare techniques, and then infiltrate them into Albania to sow discord and build a popular resistance front against the dictator's rule.
So that's been a very, very similar sort of protocol or mission type the United States has gotten involved in. Look, get exiled people, you get people that are from those regions, nationalistic people that would love to return those and have regime changes. You know what that kind of reminded me of is like Cuban exiles that the CIA was training to try to take out Fidel Castro, which, as we know, notoriously failed at the Bay of Pigs invasion.
NATO was concerned the Soviets were secretly building a submarine base, and that Albania could be used against NATO forces in the event of a full invasion of Europe. According to the Italian naval intelligence, the Albanian dictator was unpopular and the people were looking to rebel anyways. At a minimum, the operation aimed to create so much conflict within Albania that the Soviet construction there would be halted,
OSHA's not
and they
gonna
wouldn't be able to send aid to other communist groups in neighboring countries. But the grand prize was to overthrow the entire regime.
That didn't work.
The top secret operation created the template for some of the tinfoil hat government toppling that we recognize today. The first recruits for the operation started training in July 1949 on the island of Malta. In the first set of 9, they landed on the Albanian coastline using a Greek fishing boat. The group split into two teams and moved to link up with resistance groups near the city of Vlora, but they didn't get very far before Albanian security forces discovered one of the teams. 3 were killed in the gun battle, and the 5th team member went AWOL, abandoning the mission. The 2nd team was more successful, completing their assignment and sneaking across the Greek border to safety. Despite this setback, the planners at the CIA and MI6 kept sending teams of trained insurgents for more.
Dulles, Truman, you got a whole bunch of guys that were really pulling the strings for foreign operations right in this room here. I'm not just talking about when you see Churchill or Truman, where we're talking about these other guys.
The planners of the
deep
CIA
state guys, right?
Kept sending teams of trained insurgents for more than 2 years, often accompanied in person by commandos from the intelligence agencies. Over 7,500 Albanian operatives and 2,500 US or British officers participated in Operation Valuable over the course of its 5-year lifespan. But most of these infiltrations failed before making it past their landing zone because government security forces intercepted the teams, or they were turned into double agents within the resistance cells that they were supposed to meet.
So the Bay of Pigs invasion vibes were coming hard for me there. And it's like the same thing happens. Oh, man.
The planners tried everything: seaborne landings, parachute insertions, CIA piloted cargo planes, infiltration by land, yet nothing seemed to get past the tight grip of the security forces. It seemed a little bit sus. Operation Valuable agents had a tough time finding anyone within the country willing to aid an insurgency against them. No revolt came to pass, and the agents suffered heavy losses in shootouts or arrests with the security forces and the police in Albania. 300 CIA and MI6 were killed or captured over the course of this mission. As it turns out, one of the big reasons that the Albanian security forces were so suspiciously good at their job was they had help from the inside.
Okay, that happened with Bay of Pigs too, but I was going to say, I don't know. Do you guys get the hunch too that, like, for every reported capture of these type of, I don't know if you want to call them spies or whatever, black ops, for every one of those that gets captured, how many got captured that we don't know about? And what I mean by don't know about is it was never reported, right? Because you don't, once a lot of these spies, this is just a Cold War era thing. When you went off on your mission and you're given your mission details, the state very much was like, just so you know, if you get caught, we are not going to claim you. Okay. We're going to say, we don't know who you are. They're going to deny everything. Like, that was something you basically went in knowing. So for every one of these, we actually hear about them getting captured. How many more have been captured that was never publicized? Do you kind of feel like it'd be a lot more? What do you think?
MI6 liaison Kim Philby was a secret Soviet spy.
Yeah.
He was recruited by the KGB back in 1934. Philby is actually one of the most infamous Soviet spies.
A lot of people probably died because of him.
He used his position in Washington to pass along secret info from both the US and UK to the Soviets for decades, and he wasn't uncovered until 1963.
I need to look at his background a little bit more, because I've heard of him, but not necessarily why he did it. Was it simply like a money thing? Because, like, you hear about, for example, on the Manhattan Project, which, you know, got infiltrated, where some of the people working on it were giving secrets, you know, nuclear secrets, to the Soviet Union. And a lot of them, they were saying, you know, why they were doing that is they did not agree with the policy the Americans had, that we were not going to be working with our allies, trying to, like, you know, work together to try to develop atomic bombs. Because it was very much under the impression here that, you know, Germany was developing one and this was a race. So we should be doing everything possible to work with our allies to do this. And that was their, like, philosophical reasons for doing that. It's like, we got to beat Hitler. But with him, I got to look into that more. And you guys can maybe lead me towards that a little bit about what was his, like, justification, I guess, for doing it. Was he, like, communist sympathies or something? I don't know.
As for Operation Valuable, the infiltration teams were betrayed before ever getting foot in Albania thanks to this double agent. It ensured that the Albanian government was always a step ahead.
Cubans knew they were coming.
Failed in bringing down the fall of the communist government in Albania. CIA officers still managed to gather some intelligence from behind the Iron Curtain, while both the CIA as an institution and individual officers gained crucial experience that would lead to much more success throughout the Cold War later.
Yeah.
But this next story is actually terrifying to think that It was given the go-ahead by several top military officers. I first learned about this story of Operation Greenlight from one of the hosts from the podcast Team House, Jack Murphy, in his book We Defy. I got a lot of this research from that source, so I highly recommend you grab it online. Full credit to Jack. In 1983, a U.S. Special Forces team pulled up to an airfield in Pope Air Force Base, North Carolina. They were greeted by two men in black suits. They looked like feds who had no flags or identifying patches. They were fully redacted.
The men in black.
Some top secret, spooky, secret squirrel type shit. This is when things got weird, though, because 3 more trucks pulled up with a whole heavily armed security team carrying a special piece of equipment. The SF team recognized the device immediately. They knew it intimately. These guys had trained on it obsessively for months, knowing its details by heart. It was the 60-pound Special Atomic Demolition Unit, or a euphemism for a backpack-sized tactical nuclear device, the SATM. When detonated, it exploded a .02 kiloton, which is a much smaller explosive than other nuclear devices, but that's like saying it's only a little terribly powerful.
I think I've seen some test footage of that. Isn't it kind of in like these desert regions, and you can see those tests? I always wondered for years about where those came from, but then I learned about like this mini nuke program.
The Green Berets noticed there was no inert sticker on it like the ones that they had trained on. It appeared to be a live nuclear weapon. There was no time to nope out of there. They were given orders by men in black suits to load up their parachutes and prepare to drop behind enemy lines. They got in a cargo plane with the nuke and took off. Once airborne and 3 hours into their trip, they were given orders to blow up a strategic location, a piece of infrastructure in Cuba. Their target was a dam, one of the country's largest hydroelectric dams in Cuba.
By the way, destruction of dams, infrastructure like that, seen as international war crimes. People have committed them, but it's supposed to be extra no-no.
The aircraft pulled off a combat maneuver, flying 500 feet above the ground to avoid enemy radar.
Paratrooper with a nuke on his
jumped
back.
Out of the aircraft once they were near their target. I mean, point of interest. And once they got there, they were strapped to a literal nuclear device.
Oh my god!
This means that one of the soldiers was falling towards the earth at terminal velocity at one point with a nuke, and only some strings and cloth parachuting preventing the world's worst ever burn.
Oh my god!
Once they safely landed on the ground, they started to move toward the coordinates of their target dam. They set the timer, which was preset for 60 minutes. That's about how long you want to cook your nuke. However, they expected to remain with the bomb for as long as possible to make sure that they weren't discovered.
How far away do you gotta get?
No, thank you, I'm not going down with the ship. None of this was made easier by the fact that the bomb's fuses weren't accurate, because the creators of the bomb designed it in a rush to miniaturize the nuke, and this tech from the 1960s meant that the fuse could be off by several minutes. We're not microwaving a burrito here. We need more precision when it comes to nuclear weapons than few minutes, give or take.
Now, now this is so weird, because it's like, were they trying to make this like a secret? Like it would blow up and then nobody would know what the source is? Wasn't this going to be extremely obvious? Is that just, I guess, where we were at that moment, where it was like trying to get rid of all plausible deniability? That's what they were trying to do in originally with the Bay of Pigs invasion. These were going to be exiled Cubans, but they were trained and armed and had support from the US. But like that news got out early, if you didn't hear about that, and directly implicated the US and was a major backfire, cost millions, and had to basically pay ransoms for these captured insurgents here. But like the goal, I mean, they were going to blow this up, but it's like, this sounds like something you would have done like in the midst of a war, after you've already started this, with all this now fighting happening. There's no declarations of war and all this with the US.
Nuke's fuse was based on pure vibes. Before the team could worry about any of that, though, that's when out of nowhere, headlights came out from these vehicles, and an officer came out and started shouting, "Endex, Endex, Endex." Which, if you've ever been on a training mission before, you know that means mission over. This notional event has ended. That's like the safe word in the military. Index is how you stop playing around. It turns out the whole mission was taking place in America and New Mexico, not in Cuba. It's at that moment I would ask for 50% PTSD rating. This was a government-sanctioned gaslight operation to fool these Special Forces operators into thinking it was a real-world event. A bunch of lab techs and officers.
Okay. Now it makes more sense, because this thing made no sense at all. To have this kind of provocation in Cuba here would never have been, it seems like, okay. And there's no way you could have done this with, again, being like secretive. This would have been a really stupid thing for the U.S. to do. But I guess they're just testing to see if they could pull it off.
Came out and asked these troops a bunch of questions. This was Operation Greenlight, which was an actual U.S. military plan from 1962 to 1986, and many of their targets were in Europe behind Soviet lines. Stephen Bush was part of the
way to get off secret mini nukes,
team, and he said that the dams were a big target for them, that they planned to hit military industry capacity, train yards, and mountain passes. And these targets that they chose tell us a lot. And it was designed to slow down a Soviet assault. Right. It's likely these questions from the
those are typical targets that go in for when you start a war.
That they were asking. They were trying to gauge if the 10th Group soldiers were actually had the discipline to go through with these orders. There was a lot of questions about whether or not, when push came to shove, if troops would actually arm the device and take it off, given its consequences. NATO forces consider themselves to be so numerically overpowered in the region that their plan was to go full Fallout 4 on the Fulda Gap. The U.S. military created 300 of these nuke backpacks to be used throughout the world. And the part that's really wild to me is that their plans, a lot of them didn't even have an exfiltration part to it. And that wasn't even out of being lazy.
So they wanted to see if people would do these missions that, again, they were not going to have their safety guaranteed. And yeah, you could probably find somebody hyped up to do that. They don't need to be the Japanese or something and have bonsai and kamikaze attacks. Like, you think we could get a U.S. version of that here?
What it meant was that it was assumed to be a one-way trip, probably. When I was a private in the Army, sometimes I felt expendable, but I thought Green Berets weren't tossed aside like that. To add to the trauma response, these assignments were kept secret for decades, and the guys weren't even allowed to tell their families and their wives about what their job was.
I had a nuke on my backpack.
Thankfully, these weapons were never used, and some of the Green Berets that were interviewed on it thought that it was just a psychological operation to scare the Soviets, and the U.S. military never seriously considered using this tactic.
But
now that we've been all the way down the rabbit hole, let's do the one that you've all been waiting for, Operation Gladio. This one has the most controversy and conspiracy theories surrounding it. Operation Gladio was a top secret strategy developed by European countries with the United States, CIA, and NATO allies during the 1940s and through the Cold War. These were the stay-behind forces. Stay-behind forces were covert operators who lived seemingly normal lives in key strategic regions. But if war broke out and friendly forces were overrun, these sleeper cells would activate and spring into action, grabbing bombs and weapons from pre-planned caches stashed around Europe. It only became public knowledge.
Excuse me, like Jason Bourne things. Some brainwash people that have something activated where they just become assassins or something like that.
In 1990, when the Italian Prime Minister officially acknowledged that there was a secret stay-behind force that was codenamed Gladio in Italy. This then sparked investigations in France, Germany, Belgium, and many other European countries that revealed similar stay-behind networks. Different NATO countries had their own teams, and Operation Gladio was originally just the code name for the Italian contingent, but that name stuck, and Gladio now refers to the whole network, basically.
Gladiators?
These disclosures fueled these wild theories over whether these secret units had interfered in domestic politics or if they were involved in false flag operations.
Probably.
U.S. Army Field Manual 30.
Probably because there have been many that have done stuff like this, so plausible.
-31B is one of the main pieces of evidence provided for this. The document was leaked to a Turkish newspaper in 1975 originally.
Like the real Jason Bourne guys.
A strategy of conducting attacks that would then be blamed on left-wing Soviet-aligned groups to then justify government crackdowns against them. The U.S. government said that this document was a hoax that had been contrived and created by the Soviet intelligence agencies and leaked to Turkey. During the Cold War, these kind of stay-behind networks were seen by the public as resistance groups against the threat of the Soviet invasion. But absent that threat, after the Cold War, it was seen as an overreach from intelligence agencies that had gone amok. None of these claims have been definitively proven as far as I know, although from what I could tell, it seems like there certainly were criminal organizations at the very least that found and used some of these old NATO caches for their own nefarious purposes.
Wow, yeah.
Since the 1990s,
should we just be cynical and say yes, it's all real?
Explosive and firearms have been discovered and dismantled around Europe. On one hand, Operation Gladio was a Cold War era insurance policy against...
So like they find out, right, there's some house somewhere in Vienna or something, and it's like in this house there's a basement, and in the basement you lift up the rug and there's the entrance to some sub basement that has guns in it. Is that kind of what we're talking about? I totally think those exist. We have those in our own country. People love those.
It's the Soviet Union.
You probably have one.
On the other hand, it serves as a case study in how secrecy can erode public trust. Yeah. To this day, the full extent of Gladio's activities remains shrouded in mystery. I can only imagine what we'll find out about how Russians and Western countries, what their intelligence agencies were doing 20 years from now when we have access to the archives, maybe. Those are just really, I feel like, scratching the surface of Black Ops in Europe. If you want us to do another on this, if you like this format, hit the like button and subscribe to let us know. And
Subdue's new channel here, Cappy Army.
For more content, you can go to cappyarmy.com, where you can find our Patreon there to support true independent journalism, or sign up for our Pepper Box to get my exclusive weekly combat footage analysis show that's completely uncensored. I'm your everyday infantryman, Chris Cappy. Thank you guys so much for watching. Ending this transmission now.
Final thoughts. All right, it's so cool to see Chris now able to kind of do his own thing. And I had watched the little video that he did that was like, you know, I'm leaving Task and Purpose. And I thought something that was interesting was how like multiple editors or producers or whatever from Task and Purpose like followed him over that are now working on this channel. So we'll probably have, you know, similar kind of vibe to it, but now can really kind of do his own thing. And I thought that was such a good idea, because he always seemed like he really was Task and Purpose, even though that wasn't his company and stuff. He had become the face of it. So, and you can tell he's got so much support because, again, the channel, which again has like 3 videos or something now, that's it, is already at 400,000. This video I just watched has, I think it's over 1 million views now. So anyway, if you'd like me to get into covering this stuff more, I know with these, a lot of like this video, I wasn't able to add a lot. I mean, I threw in a couple other like references to other kind of covert operations from history, but you know, I'm not able to talk about and give as much commentary. It's much more of a reaction than like a commentary or response video. But if this is the kind of stuff you guys want me to cover, obviously I'll know if you guys are watching this and your view time is good in that. But as these videos continue to come out, you know, send me the recommendations. Come over to the Discord server, video suggestion channel, best way to get something to my attention. So anyway, with that, I learned a lot. Hopefully you had fun watching with me. We'll see y'all next time.